Lock down the bow airlocks and keep those batteries firing. Commander Rinholt's order cut through the cacophony of alarms, sharp as steel. The frigate Resolute jolted beneath him, a violent tremor rattling teeth and bones as another Dominion salvo smashed into her outer hull. Panels flickered, sparks leapt from fractured conduits, and the stench of burnt insulation clung to the recycled air. Red strobes pulsed across the deck, bathing men in alternating waves of light and shadow, as if the ship itself struggled between life and death. Holt braced his boots against the deck plates, eyes locked on the forward viewport where the Dominion war cluster advanced. Their ships moved in unison, serrated silhouettes cutting through the corridor with a predatory rhythm. The suppression field washed over them like invisible chains, drowning comms in static, jamming navigation, bending every human signal into useless distortion. Icons flickered and vanished from the laser plasma displays, each disappearance marking another ally silenced. Behind him, the air carried the biting tang of overheated circuits, acrid and thick enough to sting the back of his throat. "2 destroyers gone, sir," Ensign Crail shouted, voice cracking with strain. His hands danced over the console, sweat sliding down his temple. "3rd crippled. Engine compartment ripped open. She's bleeding air." Holt didn't turn. His gaze stayed fixed on the wreckage spinning outside, jagged beams glowing as they tumbled. "And communications?" Crail's fingers hovered uselessly over static-filled readouts. "Every band choked. Their field is squeezing us into silence." A violent burst of sparks erupted to the left, forcing men to shield their faces. Chief Engineer Valen Torres was already there, gloves biting into his palms as he slammed a panel shut. "They're not tearing us apart in one sweep," Torres growled through his rebreather. His words were edged with anger, but not fear. "They're carving us piece by piece, like they want the hulls intact." Holt's jaw tightened. "Capture doctrine." He said it flatly, like reciting a line of scripture. The Dominion didn't waste resources. They preferred to seize ships, strip them, repurpose them, which meant they would push slowly, not blast the corridor into oblivion. That single truth gave him a thread of opportunity, thin but real. The laser plasma displays bled with color as a Corvette ahead split down its spine. Its engines ignited in a plume that spun like a dying torch, scattering debris across the void. A strangled scream broke through on comms, cut, abrupt, silenced as the channel dissolved back into hissing emptiness. Holt clenched his jaw hard enough to ache, forcing the grief down. A commander could mourn later. For now, he needed angles. Lieutenant Merrick Dorn entered the deck, armored chest plate scarred from shrapnel. His helmet dangled from one hand, dark hair plastered to his skull with sweat. His eyes carried the storm, restless, defiant. "Boarding squads are strapped in," he said, voice harsh, clipped. "We can punch into their ships before they know what hit them." "You'll get your fight," Holt answered without shifting his stare from the viewport. "But not until I say." Another impact slammed into Resolute, throwing several men off their feet. A console cracked, screens exploding in a shower of fractured glass. The ship moaned around them, groaning under stress. Holt forced his breathing steady, letting the rhythm anchor him. Around him, men copied that rhythm without realizing it, their fear masked beneath ritual discipline. Torres's gloves scraped across the panel as he adjusted power feeds. "Half our sensor arrays are fried. We're deaf. We're blind. But if I scatter enough broken transmitters through the wreckage, I can drown their readings in noise. They'll see patterns that aren't there." Holt turned to him, eyes sharp as a drawn blade. "Ghosts?" "Yes," Torres said. "Echoes. Give me shattered hull plating, fried transponders, anything. I'll weld them together, light them like lures. They'll doubt what they see." Holt's lips thinned into the shadow of a grin, a man savoring a gamble. "Do it. Scour every drifting corpse of a ship we can reach. Dorn, get your Marines ready. You'll ride inside the debris. If they think it's junk, prove them wrong." Dorn's nod was quick, resolute. "We'll be teeth hiding in bones." Crail's voice faltered. "Sir, half of them won't even survive the launch." "Half is more than none," Holt said, his tone cold, final. "And every heartbeat we steal buys the colonies another day to breathe." That is the only currency we deal in now. The deck quieted. No one argued further. Outside, the black corridor was littered with drifting wrecks, twisted hulls glowing faintly, bodies frozen mid-motion, fragments tumbling like gravestones. The silence between impacts pressed on Holt's ears, heavy, suffocating, broken only by the distant boom of another ship torn open. He inhaled the scorched air, chest tight, then exhaled with deliberate calm. The Dominion war cluster pressed closer, tightening their net. They had not yet realized what Resolute intended. They believed victory inevitable. Holt meant to show them something else, that humans did not bow when strangled. They bared their teeth. He leaned forward, voice low, even. Get to work. If they want this corridor, let them choke on it. Cut the lifeboats loose and drag them into the wreckage field, Holt ordered, his voice carrying across the command deck with the certainty of a man who had already gambled his life. The order stunned the junior crew, but Torres understood immediately. Lifeboats without crew became decoys. Their empty hulls, stripped and wired, would hum with false signals once tethered to transmitters. Yes, Captain, Torres said, sweat tracing lines through the soot smeared across his forehead. He barked orders into his headset, and a swarm of deckhands raced down the corridors toward launch bays. Holt could hear their boots hammering metal grates, the sound blending with the wailing alarms. The frigate shook again under the tremor of Dominion fire glancing across her hull, each jolt pressing grit from the overhead seams that stung eyes and clung to lips like ash. Marek Dorn stepped closer, lowering his voice so the younger men wouldn't hear. You're turning lifeboats into bait. That means Marines go in with them. Holt met his gaze. Exactly. Dorn's pupils narrowed, like a wolf scenting both danger and opportunity. Then we'll hide inside the corpses of our own fleet. If their gunners hesitate for even a second, we'll be at their throats. Crail, young and still carrying the thin tremor of inexperience, interjected. Sir, we're already down to a skeleton crew. If the Marines are thrown away on wreckage runs... Holt cut him off, his tone cold enough to still the entire deck. Thrown away? Every soldier here knows what's at stake. If the corridor collapses, colonies starve, stations fall silent, and Earth loses its only shield. If that means we fight from coffins, then coffins it will be. Silence followed, not of defeat, but of acknowledgement. The men understood the price, and that was enough. The viewport showed a graveyard of fractured ships drifting on currents of inertia. Broken ribs of steel, scorched plating, and frozen bodies turned slowly, reflecting fire from Dominion barrages like cruel lanterns. Holt watched his Marines board lifeboats retrofitted into pods, each man sealed into armor, each helmet clipped shut with a hiss. Some clasped hands wordlessly before stepping inside. Rituals born from too many wars where farewell was never spoken aloud. Detachment 1, Dorn called over comms as he climbed into his own pod. Remember the order. Cripple power nodes, ruin their coordination, and draw fire off the Resolute. If you fall, make it costly. His voice cracked at the edges, not from fear but from the strain of carrying men into the jaws of inevitability. Pods launched, shuddering as clamps released them into darkness. They drifted outward, carried by momentum into the wreck field where Torres' salvage crews had begun to scatter transmitters and scorch plating. Sparks showered across the launch bay as another impact rattled the frigate. The crew shielded their eyes, coughing as smoke curled from ruptured conduits. On the laser plasma displays, Holt tracked faint blips where the pods hid among debris. Dominion ships advanced with geometric precision, their black hulls gleaming under running lights. They shifted to engage the Phantom fleet, suddenly blooming on their scopes. Shadows stitched together from human wreckage and Torres' jury-rigged signals. Holt leaned forward as the Dominion formation adjusted. The net, once tight, began to loosen, in uncertainty. They're breaking formation, Crail whispered, disbelief thick in his voice. They think reinforcements are coming. Not for long, Holt said, but long enough. The first pod struck. Explosive bolts shattered a false lifeboat shell, and Dorn's Marines spilled into the innards of a Dominion carrier. Muffled through comms, Holt heard the chaos. Bursts of gunfire, the scrape of armored boots against deck plating, The wet crack of melee inside corridors too narrow for rifles. Screams erupted and cut short. He smelled sweat through his rebreather filter, his own pulse hammering as if he were down there with them. Power relay disabled, Dorn reported between ragged breaths. Secondary decks collapsing, losing men, but ships bleeding. Good, Holt said softly. Bleed them until they slow. Another pod vanished in a burst of light, slagged by a Dominion escort. A dozen lives extinguished in less than a second. Holt forced himself to watch the flare fade from the viewport, refusing to blink, refusing to look away. The men deserved a witness to the cost they paid. Tor's hands worked frantically, fingers stained with grease and blood where burns split skin. He rerouted power from half-dead systems, feeding strength into the scatter transmitters. I've got their sensors chasing phantoms, he grunted, voice low and hoarse. But the trick won't hold. Once they notice repetition, we'll be stripped bare again. Then we move before they adjust, Holt replied. His tone never rose, but the weight in it made every head turn. We'll cripple what we can, and when they correct, we'll already be on the next strike. The Dominion responded with fury. Their formation bent inward, pouring fire into debris fields where echoes shimmered. Fragments of shattered frigates exploded anew, showering sparks across blackness. Holt's crew felt each distant blast reverberate through their boots, as if the corridor itself groaned under the weight of war. Krail whispered, more to himself than to anyone else, "We're ghosts chasing monsters." "No," Holt corrected without looking away from the viewport. "We're men making monsters doubt themselves." The frigate convulsed under another strike. Holt steadied himself, lungs burning from smoke, eyes stinging from sweat. His men looked to him, every one of them reading his stillness as if it were a shield. The Dominion wanted a corridor of corpses. Holt intended to leave them with something they could never measure: fear of humans who refused to collapse quietly. The deck hummed with tension, with footsteps and muttered orders, with the metallic tang of blood where men wiped cuts with the backs of their hands. Holt could almost taste iron on his tongue. He leaned toward the viewport where Dominion ships split apart to chase shadows. "Marek," he spoke into comms, voice steady, commanding, "make them remember we don't vanish. Make them see us in every wreck they thought was theirs." Gunfire echoed faintly back, followed by Dorn's harsh laugh, raw and ragged. "Aye, Captain. We'll haunt their machines until they curse the day they met us." The battle spread outward, chaos where order had ruled. Holt stood in the center of it, calm, calculating, as ghosts danced among wreckage and shadows turned into teeth. "Cut their arteries, not their armor!" Dorn's command blared through the comlink, raw and urgent, as his Marines carved into the Dominion carrier's corridors. The sounds of battle flooded Holt's ears over the channel, rifles snapping in bursts, grenades thumping through choke points, the metallic shriek of bulkheads torn apart under sudden decompression. Men grunted through clenched teeth, some gasping their last into comms before silence swallowed them. Holt listened with jaw tight, refusing to mute it. To lead was to carry every sound, every death, until the corridor itself seemed to vibrate with their weight. On the Resolute, Holt stood over the laser plasma displays, eyes following the jagged red markers blooming across the Dominion formation. Wounded ships staggered under sabotage, energy spikes flaring erratically across their profiles. Torres bent over his console, hands blackened from burns, as he guided more salvage debris into the enemy's path. He muttered under his breath, stringing together curses with prayer-like cadence. Sweat dripped from his temple, salt biting his eyes, but he never paused. "Relay from Dorn," Krail reported, voice strained as he translated through static. "Primary conduits breached. Carriers losing stabilizers." He glanced back at Holt, eyes wide. "They've done it, sir." "Not enough," Holt replied. His tone was flint, cold against the heat around him. "One crippled ship slows them. We need fractures across the entire cluster." The viewport blazed as a Dominion escort vented fire from a hull split. The flash painted the command deck in orange light, searing vision. Holt steadied himself on the chair's armrest, feeling the vibration run through his bones. Smoke hung in the air, filling lungs with a bitter taste like charred wires. The deck stank of human labor, sweat, scorched gloves, the iron tang of blood from cut palms wiped across consoles. Dorn's voice returned, this time steadier despite the roar of battle behind him. Captain, their soldiers don't break. They fall silent. They reform. They move again. Like machines, but slower when cut off from commands. His breath hitched. We're bleeding, but they're bleeding too. Holt closed his eyes for a heartbeat, then opened them to the stars. That's all I need. Bleed them long enough for me to find the spine. Across the deck, Krell stiffened. Sir, long-range scans show reinforcement signatures. Another wave inbound. His throat tightened. 3 cruisers minimum. Holt's head turned sharply toward him, but his voice came calm. Then we strike before their order doubles. Torres slammed a fist against his workstation. We're running out of wreckage to scatter. The ghosts won't last. Once they see through the patterns, they'll cut straight for our throat. Holt leaned closer, his gaze narrowing like a knife's edge. Then we stop hiding behind corpses and start tearing into them ourselves. The Resolute quivered as fresh strikes lashed across her flank. Panels buckled, vents blasted hot air that seared cheeks and arms. Krell shielded his eyes from a sudden spray of sparks, skin prickling from the heat. Holt did not flinch. He simply stared at the approaching Dominion signatures, counting their rhythm, studying their rigid choreography. He remembered years of war simulations, endless briefings on Dominion tactics. Their strength was also their cage. They trusted synchronization, the comfort of shared sight lines, data pooled across every hull. Break that chain, and captains lost the language that made them lethal. He spoke his thoughts aloud, voice low, meant for those who needed conviction. They survive through unity, shatter their spine, and they stumble like children. Krell's eyes widened as realization dawned. The relay cruisers, yes, Holt said, cut the relay, and we turn their fleet into a mob. The comm crackled again, this time with Dorn's labored breathing. Gunfire rang out behind him, screams cut short by the hiss of decompression. Captain, we've held as long as we can. Pods are ash. Half my men are gone, but the carrier's bleeding fire through every seam. It won't last. His words throbbed with exhaustion and defiance, every syllable torn from a throat dry with smoke. You've bought me the opening I need, Holt answered, steady and unyielding. Pull back what you can. We're moving, the viewport filled with burning wreckage drifting like broken bones. Dominion ships maneuvering through chaos with mechanical persistence. Reinforcement signatures flickered closer. Holt's fists clenched behind his back as he faced the crew. His voice carved through the smoke like a blade. We don't wait for their noose. We go for their throat. Helm, plot course for their relay cruiser. Gasps rippled across the deck. Krell swallowed hard, lips trembling. Straight at the heart of their formation? Yes, Holt said. His eyes gleamed with iron certainty. Straight at the heart. Torres's laugh was dry, ragged, almost disbelieving. A frigate against their spine? You're either the maddest man alive or the only one who sees the board clearly. He snapped his gloves tighter, knuckles bleeding. I'll make the driver sing, Captain. Just point us in the deck shifted under them as the Resolute turned, groaning against strain. The hull shuddered, rivets screaming under new vectors. Alarms shrieked in protest. Holt remained still, hands gripping the chairs, arms as if his steadiness alone anchored the vessel. Ahead, the Dominion relay cruiser gleamed with cold light, its exposed towers stretching into void, delicate as spines of glass, yet holding an empire's doctrine together. Around it, escorts bristled, shifting into defensive arcs. Holt's lips tightened. The Dominion still believed in their doctrine, their net of shared sight. They did not yet imagine that one human frigate would dare to strike the spine itself. Load the rods, Holt ordered. His voice was quiet, certain. Every man leaned in to hear it. We're going to remind them what happens when you underestimate men who have nothing left to lose. The crew surged into motion. Dorn's comm flickered with static as he screamed orders to retreating Marines, covering his men as they dragged wounded through ruptured corridors. Holt listened, eyes fixed on the relay cruiser growing larger in the viewport. The moment felt stretched, fragile, suspended between ruin and defiance. He did not flinch. He did not blink. He only watched, waiting for the moment the Dominion would learn fear. Target their relay cruiser. Holt's voice cut like a blade, every syllable echoing across the command deck. Men snapped to their stations, knuckles white on controls slick with sweat. The frigate Resolute lurched forward, hull groaning under redirected thrust, the vibration trembling up through boots into bones. Red strobes painted the deck in feverish pulses as crew clung to their posts, breath held between impacts. The viewport filled with the image of the Dominion relay cruiser, a towering silhouette braced by skeletal towers, rising like the ribs of a beast. Energy shimmered along its exposed spines, each pulse carrying orders through the fleet's nervous system. Around it, escorts shifted into tighter orbits, their formation an iron cage built to prevent exactly what Holt was about to attempt. Torres wiped grime from his eyes with the back of his wrist, his voice hoarse but steady. "Driver coils overloaded, sir. She'll fire once, maybe twice before we burn out." "Once will be enough," Holt replied, gaze fixed on the glowing relay towers. The frigate jolted as Dominion interceptors cut across their path, plasma fire slashing through blackness. Sparks burst inside the deck as panels blew apart, the sharp tang of scorched insulation filling lungs. Krail coughed hard, eyes watering, his hands still locked on targeting controls. "Shields dropping. Starboard plating buckling." "Hold course," Holt ordered. He never raised his voice, yet it carried weight that pressed men down into obedience. On the comm link, Dorn's voice rasped from within the carrier his Marines still fought through. "Captain, escorts are converging." "They know what you're aiming for." "You won't get near the relay," gunfire crackled behind him, punctuated by screams that dissolved into static. Holt's reply came cold, stripped of anything except purpose. "Then keep them busy long enough for us to strike." The frigate rolled violently as another salvo scraped across its flank, alarms shrieking. Men slammed against restraints, one seaman's forehead splitting open against a console. Blood smeared down the panel as he pulled himself upright without waiting for a medic, fingers flying across scorched keys. His hands trembled, but his eyes locked on Holt with a ferocity that mirrored command. Torres's crew slammed ferrous rods into the mast driver's chamber, sweat streaking their necks. The rods clanged into place, the sound reverberating through the decks like funeral bells. Torres keyed the channel, breath ragged. "Rod loaded. System hot. If we miss, we don't get a second chance." Holt's stare narrowed. "We won't miss." Heads-up displays flickered as the targeting lock wavered under suppression interference. Krail's jaw clenched so tight a vein bulged in his temple. "Target solution slipping." "Their jammers are crawling across every band." Holt stepped forward, leaning over Krail's shoulder, voice measured. "Don't chase the lock. Watch their pattern. They move like machines. They never break rhythm. Predict the rhythm, not the signal." Krail swallowed, fingers hovering. Sweat rolled down his cheek. He closed his eyes for half a breath, then recalibrated. The crosshairs steadied on the relay towers, glowing like brittle glass spines. The Dominion fleet responded. Escorts surged outward, pouring fire, energy blasts hammering against Resolute's battered hull. The frigate shook as plating tore loose, fragments drifting into the void like shredded leaves. Holt gripped the chair's arms, every jolt shooting up his spine. He felt ribs ache from the strain, the taste of iron sharp on his tongue where he had bitten too hard. "Fire!" he barked. The mast driver roared, the sound rattling through every deck, a bone-deep concussion that cracked teeth and left ears ringing. The rod streaked across the dark, a silver lance flung at the heart of Dominion control. Escorts fired frantically, streams of light chasing the projectile, but it struck home. The relay's central tower erupted, shards of luminous debris scattering across blackness. Energy cascaded violently, arcs leaping between broken spines before winking out. Across the fleet, Dominion formations stuttered, lines unraveling as ships drifted into disarray. Krail gasped, his voice rising with astonishment. "They've lost synchronization." "Escorts are falling out of step on comms." Dorn's laugh burst ragged and raw. "They're staggering, like blind beasts, every one of them fighting alone." His words were followed by another volley of gunfire, closer now, desperate and chaotic. The Resolute shook again, retaliation slamming into her. Torres yelled above the din, "Driver coils fried. We've got nothing left for a second shot. He slammed his fist against the console, skin splitting across him. Knuckles. But it doesn't matter. You crack them, Captain. You cut their spine. Holt exhaled slowly, his gaze locked on the chaos unfolding across the displays. Dominion ships veered unpredictably, some colliding with their own debris as captains struggled without unified vision. Their rigid doctrine, built on shared data, was unraveling in front of him. Helm, Holt said, voice level. Drive us straight through the break. Don't stop for anything. If they want order, let them chase shadows. The frigate surged forward, weaving through fire, her battered frame screeching. Holt watched as enemy escorts faltered, their shots uncoordinated, striking nothing but drifting wrecks. The corridor burned with chaos, Dominion's certainty collapsing under the weight of one human frigate's strike. Dorn's comm flickered, filled with the ragged breath of men still fighting. Captain, my Marines are cornered, half of them down, but their troops are flinching. They don't trust their orders anymore. Hold your ground, Holt answered, voice heavy with conviction. Every second you bleed them buys us a tomorrow. The viewport glowed with fire as another Dominion ship spun apart, its hull splitting under the confusion of friendly fire. Holt stood tall in the command chair, eyes fixed on the broken relay cruiser drifting helplessly. He had gambled everything on one strike, and the Dominion had blinked. But the cost was still climbing, and Holt knew the fight was only just shifting. The enemy was wounded, but far from finished. Report damages, he demanded, his tone flat. Krail's voice shook as he read the litany. Hull breaches across 3 decks. Life support failing on port side. 30 confirmed dead. Twice as many injured. His throat tightened as he forced the words out. We won't survive another pass, sir. Holt nodded once, grim acceptance etched into his face. He looked out at the staggering Dominion fleet, ships colliding like stunned animals, their iron disciplines shattered. For the first time, he saw hesitation in their movements. That's all we needed, Holt whispered, too softly for anyone else to hear. Push us through the gap before they remember who they are, Holt roared, and the order jolted men back to motion like a whip cracking across their backs. The Resolute surged forward into the broken formation, her hull dragging sparks from shattered fragments as she shouldered through debris fields. Fire from Dominion escorts hissed past on erratic arcs, bursts flaring in empty space where disciplined volleys should have struck true. The enemy's rigid rhythm had collapsed, and in that fracture lay humanity's chance to wound something far greater than themselves. The command deck rattled as a near miss rattled loose a ceiling panel, showering grit and insulation onto Holt's shoulders. He brushed it off without glancing down, his eyes fixed on the chaos ahead. On the display's enemy, cruisers spun off course, some colliding with their own fragments as captains fought to regain balance without shared targeting feeds. He saw hesitation in their maneuvers, the stutter of ships once welded into perfect symmetry, now reduced to clumsy individuals. Dorn's voice erupted across comms, his breath sharp and ragged. Captain, their troops are stumbling like their ships. We're carving through decks they used to guard like fortresses. They can't hear one another. They can't reform. The crackle of rifles and the thud of explosives punctuated his words, men shouting triumphantly as rooms were cleared. We've never seen them like this. His voice broke off into a grunt, then returned more raw. It's working, sir. They bleed when cut apart. Keep cutting, Holt replied, voice low, steady as iron. Every artery you sever slows the beast. The viewport flared with light as a Dominion frigate's reactor tore itself apart, flames curling outward like blooming flowers. The shock waves slapped against Resolute's shields, rattling every rib and organ inside her crew. Men grimaced as the vibration pressed into marrow, yet they held their posts. The scent of scorched fabric and hot steel coated the air, clinging to nostrils and tongues alike. Krail's eyes darted nervously over his readouts. Sir, their admiral will recognize the pattern soon. He'll regroup them with manual orders, even without the relay. We won't have long. Then we use what we have left, Holt said, turning to Torres. What can you still give me? Torres spat blackened spit onto the deck, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Hull plating barely holding. Driver's dead. Guns down to half charge. but I can overload reactor bleed into the forward cannons. It'll tear the barrels apart, but we'll punch through whatever's in our path. His voice carried the weight of a man offering the last bone in his body. Do it, Holt ordered. The engineer nodded, already barking commands to his crew. Sparks rained as tools tore into conduits, the smell of seared wiring making eyes water. One young technician burned his palm, but clenched the pipe with raw skin anyway, teeth bared in silent defiance. Through the viewport, Holt saw a Dominion cruiser loom ahead, one of the escorts drawn into their path. Its weapons lit up, torrents of fire pouring directly at Resolute. Holt's chest tightened, not in fear, but in clarity. "Helm," he said, voice sharp as broken glass. "Aim straight through its heart. Don't dance around it. Break it." The frigate charged forward, the deck tilting under acceleration. Crew slammed against restraints, muscles straining against belts biting into shoulders. Crayley's knuckles whitened, his voice breaking into a shout. "Range closing fast! Now, Tors!" Holt barked. The forward cannons screamed, energy surging beyond their design. The barrels glowed white, warping under. Strain, but the shot ripped through the Dominion cruiser's flank. The explosion tore open its midsection, fire spilling outward like guts ripped from a carcass. Shrapnel hammered Resolute's hull, punching dents that echoed through her bones. But she pushed through the wound, dragging the carcass behind like a predator unwilling to yield. Men erupted into hoarse cheers, fists slamming consoles, the sound rough and desperate rather than celebratory. Holt didn't smile. His eyes remained fixed on the displays, watching the enemy scatter further, confusion rippling across their lines. He knew victory was never about cheering. It was about surviving long enough for history to write the truth. Dorn's calm returned, blood pounding in his voice. "Captain, we've seized a carrier deck." Dominion soldiers fought until their throats spilled, but they broke without orders guiding them. "My men are planting charges to cripple her reactors." "Good," Holt said. "Make her a torch the others can't ignore." Through the viewport, Holt watched as the captured Dominion carrier's flank erupted. Fire spread across her body, lighting the corridor in orange glow. The explosion silhouetted drifting debris, twisted beams and frozen corpses, illuminated against the backdrop of war. The shockwave rattled through Resolute, men clinging to their stations as the frigate cut through turbulence like a knife. Crail's voice cracked. "Sir, every move we make is burning us alive. We can't hold this tempo." Holt looked at him, eyes cold, steady. "Then burn until there's nothing left but the mark we leave behind." The crew fell silent again, not out of despair but out of grim unity. Their commander had given them no illusions, only truth carved into orders. Every man on deck understood. This was not survival for themselves, but survival bought for those beyond the corridor. In the distance, Holt saw Dominion escorts firing into empty shadows, tricked still by lingering decoys Tors had scattered earlier. Even in chaos, their doctrine chained them to patterns they could not escape. Holt felt a chill crawl through his spine, a sense of witnessing not just a battle, but a revelation. They were creatures of order, undone by men who could thrive in disorder. "Captain," Tors rasped, his face pale with exhaustion. "The cannons are gone. Barrels fused. We're down to teeth and claws." Now Holt nodded once. "Then we bite until someone pries us open." The Dominion's fleet, once flawless, was now a battlefield of broken silhouettes. Carriers burned, escorts drifted out of control, captains stumbled without their shared voice. Yet Holt knew their admiral was still out there, still gathering his will, still preparing to turn desperation into counterstrike. The night was not finished bleeding, but for now Holt allowed himself one quiet breath, the air sharp and dry in his lungs. He stared out at the relay's smoldering ruin, then at his own ship, battered to her core. He whispered so softly only those nearest could hear. "We've made them doubt." And doubt, Holt knew, was the seed that could kill an empire. "Boarding latches engaged! Open the clamps!" Holt's command rang out, shaking men from exhaustion into raw urgency. The Resolute had buried her battered frame into the flank of the crippled Dominion relay cruiser, teeth of reinforced steel biting into enemy armor. Metal shrieked as docking claws dug deep, the vibration rattling teeth and hammering bones until men gritted jaws to keep steady. The decks groaned under the strain, bolts raining from overhead seams as if the ship itself resisted the act. Merrick Dorn's Marines stood shoulder to shoulder in the launch bay, armor scarred and streaked with soot. Their visors reflected the red emergency lights, each face hidden behind a mirror of steel and sweat. He raised his rifle and shouted above the roar, "We fight through until there's nothing left to hold us back." Once that bridge falls, their admiral sees his empire crumble in real time. His men slammed fists against armor plates in answer, a sound raw enough to thrum in the chest. The docking tunnel extended, shaking violently as Dominion troops on the other side poured fire into the seal. Sparks cascaded as rounds struck, the air thick with scorched insulation and the bitter taste of recycled oxygen, barely keeping lungs filled. Holt's voice carried over comms, steady and calm, cutting through chaos. "Every step you take is another second their fleet stumbles. Make those seconds count." The seal burst open, smoke rushing into the tunnel as the Marines surged forward. The corridor beyond was chaos. Dominion defenders crouched behind barricades, their rifles spitting streaks of searing light. The clash was immediate and brutal. Dorn's lead man caught around to the chest plate, his body jerking back, smoke curling from the impact. Another Marine vaulted over him, grenade launcher thudding as the barricade disintegrated into shards. The blast deafened ears, the shockwave rattling helmets, but it carved a path forward. Boots thundered across the scorched deck plates as Marines stormed deeper. Dorn fired bursts down side corridors, the recoil pounding against his shoulder. His ears rang from the barrage, the smell of hot steel clinging to the inside of his helmet. He shoved forward, shouting orders hoarse from smoke. "Clear the junction, left flank, move!" His men obeyed, spreading through choking haze as alarms screamed overhead. Back on the Resolute, Holt stood unflinching before the displays, watching Dorn's team cut into the relay cruiser. The heads-up panels flickered with unstable feeds, showing flickers of bloodied corridors and jerking helmet cams. Holt leaned on the chair, his voice low enough for only his bridge crew to hear. "That admiral needs to watch his own doctrine collapse around him. Nothing hurts a ruler more than seeing certainty unravel with his own eyes." Inside the cruiser, Dorn's squad reached the central stairwell. Dominion soldiers dropped from overhead gantries, rifles barking as flashes of light lit up the smoke-filled air. 2 Marines fell, bodies tumbling down the steps, armor sparking against steel. Dorn roared, charging upward, rifle blazing. He felt every impact thump against his chest plate, his ribs bruising beneath, but rage drove him faster. He reached the top, slammed his rifle butt into a soldier's throat, and watched the man crumple, gasping. "Bridge is 3 doors ahead," Dorn growled, blood running from a cut above his brow. His squad reformed, breath loud in their helmets, nerves stretched thin but unbroken. They pushed forward, clearing room by room, each skirmish leaving the air thicker with the stench of burned composites and the iron tang of spilled blood. Finally, the blast doors loomed, thick, reinforced, scarred already by the exchange. Dominion officers barked commands on the far side, their language harsh, clipped, frantic. The Marines planted charges, their hands shaking but steady. Dorn pressed his palm against the detonator, voice carrying into comms. "Captain, this is it." "Do it," Holt answered, voice calm as ever. The corridor shook violently as the charges ignited, fire bursting outward, smoke choking the narrow passage. Marines surged through the breach, rifles up, vision blurred by the haze. The bridge sprawled before them, Dominion officers frozen in shock, their admiral standing tall at the center, armor black and gleaming, eyes burning with disdain. Admiral Sykar's voice boomed, sharp enough to cut through the chaos. "You are insects gnawing at the bones of giants. Do you think your defiance rewrites order?" His hand swept toward his guards. "Crush them," Dorn answered with a roar and gunfire. The clash was savage, rifle butts smashing into helmets, blades tearing through armor joints, grenades bouncing across consoles. The bridge filled with smoke and screams, ears ringing from the deafening blast of close-quarters combat. Dorn drove himself forward, his rifle empty, switching to knife as he crashed into a guard. He stabbed upward beneath the man's chin, the blade slipping and hot and brutal, blood spraying across his visor. Through it all, Holt's voice came steady in their ears, grounding them. Push through. Make him see what fear looks like when it wears a human face. The fight ended with Dorn dragging Admiral Sikaar to his knees, his armor cracked, breath hissing through bloodied lips. The Dominion Admiral glared upward, disbelief carved across features that had never known defeat. Dorn pressed his knife to the man's throat, his breath ragged, every muscle trembling from exhaustion. Over the open comms, Holt spoke for every survivor still clinging to life in the corridor. Admiral Sikaar, your fleet falters. Your doctrine lies broken at your feet. Look at your bridge. Look at your silence. This is what humanity does when pressed to the wall. You fracture. The bridge grew still. Smoke curled upward from consoles, sparking weakly. Marines bled on the deck, some unmoving, some gasping through torn armor. The Dominion crew lowered their weapons, eyes darting between their admiral and the humans who had stormed through fire to reach him. Holt leaned forward on the command deck of the Resolute, voice steady, cold. You built your empire on the illusion of unity. Today you've seen what chaos in the hands of men can do to your order. Remember it. For the first time, Admiral Sikaar's eyes flickered, not with defiance, but with something unfamiliar. Dorn saw it. Every Marine in that smoke-choked bridge saw it. Doubt. And in that doubt, Holt knew the Dominion's collapse had begun. Get us off that cruiser before we're welded to its corpse. Holt's command lashed across the bridge, his tone flinty enough to cut through exhaustion. The Resolute shuddered violently as clamps disengaged from the Dominion relay ship's hull. Docking arms screeched like dying animals before snapping free, chunks of plating spiraling away into darkness. The frigate pulled back, dragging scorch trails across her battered sides. Men braced themselves against consoles slick with sweat and blood as the ship lurched clear. The viewport revealed a corridor lit in orange flames. Dominion escorts were no longer synchronized machines. They fired erratically, colliding with drifting debris, and even striking one another in the chaos. Yet their retaliation, though fractured, still struck with deadly weight. A volley slammed into Resolute's stern, and the deck buckled under the concussion. Holt steadied himself against the command chair, ribs aching from the impact. He forced his voice steady. Damage report. Krail's voice wavered as he scanned failing systems. Port side decks ruptured, aft compartments vented. We've lost 30 more. Reactors bleeding output. Shields are gone, sir. His lips trembled as he turned. We won't last another broadside. Then don't give them one, Holt said evenly. We fight moving. We bleed moving. We die moving if we must. His eyes burned with a conviction that steadied the crew more than the words themselves. On the heads-up displays, distorted feeds from Dorn's Marines flickered. The relay bridge was secured, its officers disarmed, its admiral kneeling in defeat. But Dorn's voice crackled through the link, raw with fatigue. Captain, we've taken their bridge, but we can't hold it. Reinforcements are clawing through bulkheads. We're dragging wounded, but every corridor behind us is closing. Gunfire rattled in the background, followed by the heavy thump of grenades. Tell me you've got us a way out. Holt's hand tightened on the chair arm. Fall back to your pods. Resolute will cover you. Dorn's ragged laugh spilled over static. Pods are ash, Captain. We're improvising airlocks with Dominion plates. If you can't meet us halfway, we'll burn in their corridors buying you time. You'll live if I have to rip the cruiser open myself, Holt snapped, his voice harder than steel. Hold until I say otherwise. The deck rocked again as Dominion gunners poured fire across Resolute's bow. Consoles shattered, glass spraying across faces and hands. A young ensign cried out, clutching bloodied knuckles, but he steadied himself and kept working. The smell of scorched insulation clung to every breath, thick enough to scrape the throat raw. Tors's voice boomed from engineering, carried through open comms. Captain, we're down to bone. Hulls splitting, reactors coughing. We can overload starboard thrusters for one last push, but it'll gut the frame. Do it, Holt ordered without hesitation. Better a gutted frame than a corpse adrift. The frigate lurched, her thrusters screaming as overloaded fuel pumps spat raw power. The ship shot forward, slamming through a cloud of drifting debris. Fragments hammered her hull like stones against glass, the sound echoing through decks as men ducked instinctively. Ahead, a gap yawned where Dominion formation had unraveled. "Signal the Marines," Holt said. His throat burned with smoke, but his voice carried like iron. "Tell them their path is opening." On the comm, Dorn's voice broke through. A roar mingled with the rattle of rifles. "Understood, Captain. We're dragging every breathing man. If we fall carrying steel." The viewport lit as another Dominion cruiser flared, her hull torn by her own confused escorts. Holt's eyes narrowed at the sight. This was not victory. It was infection spreading through an empire's veins. Yet the cost was written across every inch of his ship, every wounded man gasping for air on failing decks. Crail looked up from his station, pale but steady. "Sir, if we slow to retrieve them, we'll be a target. If we keep speed, we leave them behind." Holt turned his gaze on the young ensign, his expression carved in stone. "We slow. No man who fought his way into hell for us will be abandoned." The bridge grew quiet. Men knew the risk, but the silence was acceptance, not fear. The frigate veered hard, thrusters whining as she slowed to skim the edge of the relay cruiser. Fire poured across her hull, panels exploding into sparks that rained across consoles. The air burned with heat, eyes watering, lips cracked and dry. Through the haze, Holt saw Dorn's men emerge, tiny shapes against the massive hull. They clung to makeshift airlocks, dragging wounded strapped to bent plating. Figures stumbled, one Marine collapsing before another hauled him up. Holt's jaw tightened. "Helm, bring us closer. Shields or no shields, we take them in tours cursed over comms." His voice ragged. "Captain, another volley and the frame snaps." "Then we snap holding our own," Holt answered. The frigate closed distance, docking arms reaching out like broken fingers. Marines leapt across the gap, armor scraping sparks as they crashed into Resolute's hull. Wounded were thrown across, hands reaching from both sides to drag them in. Holt's knuckles whitened on the chair as he watched each silhouette disappear inside, counting them like beads on a rosary. The Dominion fleet struck again, fire ripping across Resolute's flank. Deck plating split, men tumbled as gravity flickered. Holt slammed against the chair, pain jolting through his ribs, but he forced his voice through clenched teeth. "Report, how many made it?" Crail's voice came back, hoarse, trembling. "Half, Captain. Half are inside, the rest," he faltered. "The rest didn't move fast enough." Holt closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them with iron clarity. "Then honor them by surviving. Get us out." The frigate pulled away, trailing smoke and broken steel. Behind them, the relay cruiser burned, its bridge torn, its admiral silenced. Dominion escorts still clawed at order, but their unity was gone, their certainty fractured. Holt stared at the flames, the smell of scorched filters clogging his lungs, the taste of ash bitter on his tongue. He spoke softly, but every man heard it. "We held against an empire and dragged its pride into the fire. Now we leave with the proof that they can break." The corridor behind them glowed with wreckage and corpses, but ahead stretched survival, fragile and uncertain. And for the first time, Dominion ships pulled back, unwilling to chase further into chaos. Holt sat straighter in his chair, pain shooting through his ribs. His men bled, his ship groaned, but he gave no sign of faltering. "Set course for the corridor's edge," he said. "We've given them their lesson. Now we survive to tell it. Keep her steady, or we bleed out before we clear the corridor." Holt's order rang across the bridge, sharper than the alarms wailing through every deck. The Resolute dragged herself forward, hull groaning like old timber under crushing waves. Plates bent inward, sparks showered from ruptured conduits, and the air stung with the taste of burned filters. Crew coughed against masts, eyes watering, yet hands never left their stations. They were bruised, burned, broken, but still fighting to keep the ship alive. Dominion fire had lessened, not from mercy but from confusion. The enemy flotilla lingered at distance, its formation fractured, its captains hesitant. On the heads-up displays, the once perfect web of crimson enemy markers was scattered, overlapping, trembling in uncertainty. Holt watched it, his chest tight, ribs throbbing, but his voice steady. They're afraid to follow. They don't know what else we're hiding. Crail leaned over his console, blood dripping from a cut along his hairline. Sir, systems are collapsing. Life support on port side is gone. Engineering says, we'll lose thrust if the reactor bleeds another surge. His voice cracked, yet he forced himself to finish. We might not make it out. We've already made it, Holt replied. His gaze never left the drifting enemy shapes on the viewport. Look at them. For the first time, they doubt Torres's voice burst through comms, hoarse and raw. Captain, I've got men welding with bare hands because tools burned out. We're sealing leaks with plating stripped from the dead. If you want one more push, we'll give it, but it'll tear the bones out of her. Holt closed his eyes briefly, then opened them with the weight of command pressing into every syllable. One last push, Valan. Enough to carry us clear. Below decks, Torres's crew roared in answer, a sound more defiant than fearful. Sparks sprayed as they jammed rods into fractured conduits, the heat scalding their skin. The smell of burning gloves thick in the air. The Resolute shuddered, her thrusters coughing before igniting with a force that threw men against bulkheads. Pain seared across bodies already battered, but the frigate clawed forward, carving through wreckage toward the corridor's edge. On comms, Dorn's voice returned, ragged from exhaustion but unyielding. Captain, half my men can't walk. They're crawling across decks slick with blood, but every step they take, they curse the Dominion for every brother they lost. They'll make it if the ship holds. She'll hold, Holt said firmly. She was built to carry men like you. The bridge vibrated as another Dominion volley grazed their stern. Hull plates screeched, oxygen vented, men gasped against thinning air. Crail slammed a panel shut with his shoulder, sealing off a ruptured feed. That was too close, he shouted, desperation cracking through his voice. They won't press further, Holt answered. Not today. They've lost too much already. His eyes flicked to the drifting remains of the relay cruiser, its shattered spine still glowing faintly. And they've seen the cost of underestimating us. Silence followed, except for the groaning of the ship. Men stared at him, their commander who had dragged them through ruin and into something larger than themselves. Holt's voice softened, though it carried as powerfully as before. We didn't win because we were stronger. We won because we were willing to bleed in ways they couldn't imagine. That's our weapon, and they'll remember it every time they look at this corridor. The viewport widened as the frigate finally cleared the wreckage, stars spreading ahead like cold lanterns. The Dominion fleet shrank behind, their ships no longer chasing but retreating, their discipline shattered by one human vessel that refused to yield. Dorn's Marines staggered onto the bridge, armor blackened, visors cracked, bodies bruised and burned. Dorn himself limped forward, his rifle hanging by its strap, his eyes bloodshot, yet burning. He stopped before Holt, removed his helmet, and dropped it onto the deck with a clang. Half my men are gone. The rest, they'll never be the same. His voice trembled, not with weakness, but with the weight of loss. Holt met his gaze without flinching. None of us will. But what we did here will echo far beyond us. You showed an empire that men from a single frigate could cut their doctrine in half. That's worth every scar. Torres staggered onto the bridge, grease and blood streaking his face. His arms hung heavy, knuckles burned raw. We gave her everything, Captain. She's a carcass held together by prayer, but she carried us. He slumped into a seat, too tired to remain standing. Holt let his eyes sweep the room. The exhausted crew, the wounded Marines, the broken engineer. Every man had given more than he had left, yet they still stood, still breathed. His chest tightened, not with pain, but with pride. Remember this moment, he said quietly. Not for the glory, for the truth. The Dominion didn't retreat because of our weapons. They retreated because they finally understood what humans are capable of when cornered. The bridge fell into silence. The only sound was the crackle of sparking panels and the uneven breaths of survivors. Men met each other's eyes, and in that silence lay recognition. They had not only lived through the impossible, They had altered the balance of their place in the galaxy. Krail, voice softer now, asked the question trembling at the edges of every man's mind. Sir, what do we call this place now? Holt turned to the viewport, staring at the burning wreckage of Dominion ships drifting across the corridor. Flames floated like funeral pyres, lighting the path back toward Earth. He answered with the weight of finality, each word striking like iron. The corridor of refusal. That's what they'll name it, because here their empire learned that humanity doesn't surrender. No one spoke after. The name settled over them like a banner stitched in fire and blood. The Dominion fleet had collapsed not because of superior weapons, but because one frigate and her crew had chosen defiance over extinction. That defiance would spread, whispered in stations and colonies, carried across neutral channels, retold by merchants and soldiers. Holt stood straight despite the agony in his ribs, his voice carrying one last time across the broken bridge. History won't remember our losses, only that a single ship forced an empire to retreat. Let them remember us as the day they discovered humanity cannot be chained. The Resolute limped forward into open stars, wounded but unbroken. Behind her, the Dominion licked its wounds in silence. Ahead, the message spread like wildfire. The Dominion's fleet had collapsed because one human frigate refused to die. If this story shook you to your core, smash that subscribe button right now for more thrilling HFY tales where humanity rewrites the rules of war. Now we want to hear from you. If you were in Commander Holt's chair, what desperate tactic would you have used to shatter the Dominion fleet? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one. Thanks for watching Stellar HFY, where strategy wins wars before they're ever fought. See you in the next story.